Welcome to the Crackin Backs Podcast, where we sat down with Dr. Paul Langer, a sports medicine podiatrist. Today, we're stripping down the bare essentials with Dr. Langer to tackle the groundswell of interest in barefoot running. From the natural benefits to the potential risks, we're uncovering what you and your feet truly need to thrive. Are we supporting our feet too much or not enough? And in the world overflowing with shoe choices, how do you step correctly for your health and performance? Plus, we'll unravel the mystery of pre-taping for sports such as football, volleyball, and basketball. Is it a precaution or just a placebo? Lace up, or rather take them off, for an enlightening journey into the foundation of our bodies. You won't want to miss a step of this groundbreaking discussion. Tune in now. Well, thank you, Dr. Paul Langer, for being on the air with us. We are looking so forward to having you on the show and really just basically talking feet, but a whole lot more. And welcome. You bet. Let's start by I want to kick this off by wanting your opinion on this whole concept of barefoot running, which you seem to have really taken a special interest with. Can you give us a little idea as a podiatrist what you deal with and your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I'll preface it by saying that I am a fan of it, and the research for it just keeps getting better and better. Probably like a lot of people, back in 2009 was when Born to Run, the book, came out by Chris McDougall. And probably by 2010, 2011, I had a lot of patients starting to ask me about barefoot running. And as a podiatrist, that I specialize in sports medicine, but endurance sports is kind of what led me into podiatry and was always my special interest, especially running and triathlon. So when my patients started asking me about it, I was like, well, I need to understand this better. And I tell people that I tried barefoot running the same way I tried sushi. I had no intention of liking it. And I was like, this is actually pretty cool. So the first time I ran barefoot, and then I got some minimalist shoes like everybody did back then. And that was the Vibram 5 Fingers were kind of the first ones that were big. But once I started running in them, and I was lucky in that, being from Minnesota, I live on the Mississippi River, so I could actually run on dirt and single track right next to the river. I didn't have to go straight to concrete or asphalt. So I just spent a summer basically building up my mileage running barefoot and in minimal shoes. I really liked it. And that summer, well, actually, I think the following summer, I did about half of my mileage in minimal shoes, but I didn't just kick off my shoes and go barefoot or minimalist. I spent a long time transitioning. And on the flip side of that, in clinic though, I was seeing a lot of patients coming in with metatarsal stress fractures, with calf strains, with Achilles tendonitis, because they just threw their shoes in the garbage and went barefoot or went minimalist. One of my patients, his very first run barefoot, he did 12 miles, and he had a stress fracture at the end of that 12 miles. So there was a lot of kind of over enthusiasm, right, I would say, for it initially, and you guys probably saw that in practice too. So then there was a little bit of a backlash, like, maybe running shoes aren't so bad for us. Maybe we need them. But the reality was no one was adapted to running in minimalist shoes. And so I would say even today, like, I never completely gave up my shoes, or conventional shoes, I would say, but I rotated in a minimalist shoe. And I still do that to this day. I'll run in them. I just ran barefoot on the beach the other day, 3.5 miles, felt pretty good, but I just spent a long time kind of building up to that. But that was the problem, is that people jumped in a little too enthusiastically. And since that time, though, now there's gotten to be better research about potentially how to make a transition. There's benefits to minimalist shoes or going barefoot, even just for walking. So you don't have to run in them to have a benefit from them. But this, initially, it was kind of like, all running shoes are bad. They make us weak and they injure us. So therefore, we must be all in barefoot or minimalist shoes and not get injured. But it didn't work that way. We still got injured. It was just different types of injuries that were popping up because of the different stresses and loads that minimalist shoes or barefoot running places on our body, in contrast to some of how the stresses and loads are distributed with conventional shoes.
What is a minimalist shoe?
an example? I think of those ones with the fingers, the toes.
Yeah, Vibram 5 fingers were kind of the first one, and I have one here because I knew that question would come up. But there was a paper done by a couple Canadians, Scuyer and Blaise Dubois, and they wrote a paper called the Minimalist Index, and basically on how to stratify shoes, like what's the most stiff and supportive shoe versus what's a shoe that's minimalist. Now, this would be an example of a minimalist shoe. This one happens to be Vivo Barefoot, a British brand, but minimalist shoes have no cushioning and no support. So I can fold that up into nothing. It's just a thin sheet of rubber and then just something to secure it to your foot. And there's a bunch of different brands now. Zero. New Balance is bringing back their Minimus line of shoes that they had for a while. And then as minimalism kind of died, it's kind of slowly creeping back. But so the shoe has literally no cushioning, no support. There's a few different brands that call themselves minimalist, but if they have even a little bit of cushioning, a little bit of support to them, it wouldn't, in the strictest definition, be a minimalist shoe. So that cushioning affects how you move and affects impact and loading and things.
For your regular patient that's looking to go barefoot, how do you tell them to transition and what to be careful of?
Yeah, and that is one of the questions that comes up very frequently now. I actually use as a reference point a paper that Sarah Ridge and colleagues did at the university, I think at Brigham Young University in 2018. And they just use this for walking, but it's a great way to start. In their study, they were looking at whether minimalist shoes or barefoot walking, well, they used shoes in the study, builds foot strength. And so they had a control group that was just doing foot intrinsic strength exercises. And then they had the intervention group that was using minimalist shoes. And what they did was the first 2 weeks of the study, the subject's goal was to walk 2,000 steps a day in the minimalist shoes, 5 out of the 7 days of the week. The next 2 weeks of the study, they progressed to 5,000 steps a day. And then the next 2 weeks, they did 7,000 steps a day. And over the course of the study, they found that comparing them to the group that was doing the exercises, the minimalist group built foot strength just by walking in minimalist shoes. So their feet got stronger. They weren't doing any exercises. They were just wearing minimalist shoes. And they built strength in slightly different ways from the group doing the foot strengthening. So I tell my patients, you should actually do both. You should do foot intrinsic strengthening exercises on your own, but an easy way to get some strength and benefit to your feet is just wear minimalist shoes. You don't have to work at it. You just put them on and move around in them. So that study, I actually have a little summary of that on a handout that I give my patients on foot strengthening. And it's a great tool. So whether they want to run in their minimal shoes or walk in them, I say you got to start walking, of course, build some strength, and then you can start a transition to running. And there isn't one university accepted or studied program I've seen on running, but generally I just tell people if you let pain be the guide and do it gradually, like you would for any kind of transition to a running program or higher intensity training, okay, no, you guys know well, then you should be able to do it safely.
Hey, Paul, you mentioned that you ran on the beach barefoot. I like that idea. I started running on the beach once my knees started bothering me from running on pavement.
Yeah.
But I made sure I had my shoes on. Would you transition from having shoes on the beach to barefoot on the beach? Because it require a lot more flexibility, I would imagine.
Yeah, you certainly could. And even like one way to do it would be just that way, Spencer. Like bring your shoes with you. And then maybe say, I'm going to do like 5 minutes or 10 minutes without my shoes. And then if you start to get kind of sore or achy, say, all right, now I'm going to put my shoes back on. And you could gradually, increase how much you're barefoot and how much you're running with your shoes. And again, I don't have any evidence-based or studied methods that would say what the ideal amount is. But just like, any athlete, you tend to know, what feels good, what doesn't. So when you start to get fatigued or tired, put the shoes back on, and very likely you'd be able to gradually increase how much you ran barefoot.
I'm sure you would caution people about running on the slant on the beach, which is would really throw off your mechanics.
Yeah, definitely. So, especially in Florida, I've seen it slope pretty severely in some places.
Yeah.
So I was on a pretty flat stretch out here recently, but yeah, those things. And as you know, too, heading south with the slope one way and then heading north, to finish your run back the other way. But But yeah, sometimes you just kind of try to find that flattest surface you can, or just make sure you're evening it out.
I'm glad you brought up foot strength, Paul, because that's one of my pet peeves. People will strengthen their hands after injury or to work, but we never seem to strengthen our feet. It seems to be like this lost appendage below the waist, and yet it feeds into the hip. And so,
Yeah.
nobody strengthens their feet. They want to cushion them. They want to make them softer. They want to do that. And I see these athletes coming in and they have no muscles in their feet and they wonder why they're constantly getting plantar fasciitis yet. So what are some foot strengthening exercises that you can recommend? And can you talk about how to take care of our feet and for overall strength and health?
Yeah. So I think even believe it or not, as a podiatrist, there wasn't a lot of information about the small muscles of the feet, the intrinsics or strengthening when I was a student or starting practicing. And I think that started to change around 2015 when there was a paper that came out. McKeon was the lead author, but basically it was called the foot core paradigm. And they equated the intrinsic muscles of the feet to the core muscles of our pelvis. And basically, saying that these are the muscles that stabilize your foot so the big muscles can provide movement. But we haven't really understood their function because it's hard to measure what they do. They're so small and some of them are so deep, you can't really measure EMG, do surface EMG on them. But that paper kind of opened people's eyes that, maybe we've been neglecting the importance of these small muscles. And so since 2015, the awareness has been growing. And the exercises that I've been teaching pretty much all my patients. So I'll tell them that the evidence for strengthening these muscles isn't just to reduce your risk of injury or help treat an injury, but it also improves sports performance. It improves balance in our older patients. So even my patients that are in their 70s or 80s, I'll tell them these exercises will decrease your risk of falling. You need to make them a part of your daily routine. But the ones that I typically recommend are, some people call them toe yoga or toe piano. But the ones where you press the big toe down, lift the little toes up, little toes down, big toes up. And then like any strengthening program, first you activate those muscles. And you guys, I'm sure have seen this in clinic, where you could have a super fit athlete and they cannot get their big toe to go up independently, or they can't get their little toes to spread out. So like you can take someone super fit and say, all right, you have to first activate these muscles. So first they do it from a seated position. Once they can do 10 repetitions, then they can graduate to the strengthening part of it, where initially they do it standing, then standing on one foot, and you can do little hops off of them to gradually make it progressively harder. And then there's also doming or short foot, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, where the biggest muscle in the foot is the abductor hallucis muscle, and that muscle weakness of that muscle is associated with a lower arch height, with plantar fasciitis. It's significant in bunion deformities as well. And there's evidence in the literature that strengthening it helps align the foot, stabilize the foot, raises the arch. So first strengthening that one with short foot, and there's also something called the toe spread out exercise. And same deal, activate, then progressively strengthen, and then keep it as a part of your fitness routine, because those muscles will become inhibited and latent, as you guys know, if they don't stay on top of it. And so those exercises I tell everybody you got to do, but then I also just remind them an easy way to keep those muscles strong and active is make sure that you're using minimalist shoes at least. If you don't like working out in them, at least use them as a recovery shoe or in between your workouts.
You're giving me, this is a favorite thing of Spencer, but now you're giving me goosebumps because I love this stuff. Because it's so nice to talk to a podiatrist that has a thought process, because I have tested every patient first day they come in. I make, even if I have a shoulder injury, I make them take the shoes and socks off, and I go, if you wore mittens on your hands all day long, you would lose dexterity in your hands. But we wear mittens on our feet all day long. We wonder why we can't control our toes. And I say everything your hands can do, your feet should be able to do. And I now have an athlete that can do this with his 4 toes. He can separate them, and he can take a coin and go across them. And all his ankle injuries and his knee injuries went away. And so my question to you is, as a podiatrist, what's your thoughts on these foot strengthening and toe exercises, but it more of when we come out of a boot, whether it's an ankle injury or a foot injury, why are we not or what's your thoughts on the old way of doing things, which is like putting them in a hookah shoe and orthotics and bracing them and all that stuff versus getting them into doing some foot exercises right away, like with our hands. What's your thoughts on that and to build up these arches? Because, and my last point is, in nature, when you see an arch, it's never supported by something underneath, it's supported by the structure. So why aren't we going back to that thought process?
Yeah. Well, and all those tools you mentioned, Terry, are, to a certain extent necessary, but then, how do you transition back
Yeah.
away from those kind of artificial forms of support? And like, I know that, like, I've seen some studies show even 2 weeks in a cam boot causes stiffness of the ankle and weakness of the muscles. So very quickly, there's a negative effect that cast disease sets in, right? So if you got someone who's recovering from a fracture or severe ankle sprain, I'll have them start the toe yoga even before they can bear weight. So I'll just tell them, I rarely put people in fiberglass or plaster casts anymore for fractures. And partly is because the cam boots are adequately protected, those stiff rocker bottom boots. And then they can take them off to do little things like mobilizations and activation of their muscles and maybe sleep better. So I tell them that as soon as their pain allows, they need to start doing little activation of their muscles, and just passive range of motion for ankle to minimize some of the effects of being immobilized. And then in terms of transition back, so that can be a little bit tricky. For example, like some of the athletes that we work with, especially metatarsal stress fractures, like it takes on average about 9 weeks for a runner to return to running after a metatarsal fracture. So, and we work with a lot of the college athletes and some of the professional runners in our areas. And so, they're itchy to get back to it, right? So I will have them start to use an insole or a hoka because they do reduce bending forces on the metatarsals, but I'll also tell them this is something that we transition from. So, the boot is for the acute part of the injury, and then we use other tools to modify the loading of the injured tissue as they start to heal. But then as soon as they're strong enough and stable enough and pain-free enough, then we remove that artificial support while they're building strength to increase their capacity even before their full speed. So kind of using all those tools, Terry, like in that stratified approach from the acute part of the injury back to full return to sport, we'll utilize all of those for sure. Because there is evidence in the literature that insoles, orthotics, and rocker bottom shoes can decrease bending forces, but again, potentially short-term.
What is a realistic, a realistic strategy for return this? Because you'll see people with plantar fasciitis that they go, I've been suffering this for years, and then you go, well, what have you done for it? Well, I just keep wearing the boot, so, and then tendinopathy, they'll say, well, some doctors will say, well, tendinopathy is not really an inflammatory condition. It's more of a internal tendon micro tears deep inside the core of the tendon. So what's some of your thought processes on return to sports and strategies and timeframes?
Yeah. So for soft tissue injuries, I generally follow the pain monitoring principle, and Karen Silbernagel developed it specifically for Achilles tendon, but it applies to other soft tissue injuries. So her pain monitoring model for the Achilles was basically if an athlete's pain is less than a 5 on a scale of 10 during activity and they're improving week to week, they can be active on it. So if their pain, though, goes above a 5 or above, or their progress reverses or plateaus, then they have to modify the workout activity again. So I'll use that for the Achilles tendon, for other types of tendinopathies. And then for plantar fasciitis, I might be a little more aggressive than others. And maybe the reason I say that is because I lived with plantar fasciitis for 20 some years before my feet got strong enough where it wasn't as much of an issue. But I tell my patients I never skipped a run because of plantar fasciitis. And there was times when, probably like a lot of the athletes you guys treated, you guys have done it yourself, I'm sure. You're just like, I don't care if it hurts. I got to go for a run today. And I would just do it, right? And I always came out the other side okay. And I wasn't stupid about it. I wouldn't beat the hell out of my foot 5 days in a row. But there's just times when you want to be out there. So I've kind of learned in talking to athletes about plantar fasciitis that, I use that pain monitoring model. If it's above a 5, you're going to move differently. You're going to hurt something else. And if you're beating the heck out of it 5 days in a row, that's just not smart. But you don't got to sit on the couch and wait for your pain to go away. So So generally, I feel like the one thing with plantar fasciitis is kind of merciful is that it usually does warm up and get better with movement, right? But then you sort of pay for it later, either later that day or the next morning. So I in that context, I'll use some tools to stay active. But once I started introducing or adding minimalist and barefoot running to my routine, my plantar fasciitis really didn't bother me anymore. I might feel it once in a while because some of the studies show 30 to 50% of people that get plantar fasciitis are vulnerable to reoccurrence. And I clearly was in that category. Maybe I still am, but I found that it's much more manageable now that my feet are stronger.
Have you found this thought process of getting your feet stronger, minimalist shoes, barefoot running, has also helped with your patients with shin splints?
Well, not necessarily shin splints. It's interesting you bring that up because I'm actually going to participate in a study on that coming up this summer. But it could help in shin splints in this way. So when you run with minimalist or run barefoot, you tend to shorten your stride just automatically because our bodies are basically programmed to move in the way that's most metabolically efficient and least painful. And I even have some video of myself running in conventional shoes and running in my minimalist shoes on a treadmill without even thinking about it. When I run in my minimalist shoes, I have a shorter stride and I land with a flatter foot placement.
Interesting.
But when I put on my cushioned shoes, I have a longer stride and I'm a little bit more of a heel striker. So in the context of shin splints, there are some studies that show you can reduce shock loading to the tibia by shortening the stride and landing with a flatter foot placement. So I do tell some of my patients that you can modify your gait. I'm not a big fan of telling people how to run, but if you did it for a short-term intervention to help someone run, you could say you can shorten your stride 10% to reduce some shock loading to the tibia. And there was a study done on it, but it was done by Irene Davis at Harvard, but they did it more on females with a history of tibial stress fractures. So it wasn't exactly the same, but they did show they reduced shock loading just by shortening the stride and running with a higher cadence. But there was also a study that showed for shin splints that running with a wider base of gait reduced pain. And it was a small study, I think only about 15 or 16 patients. But the idea was, the tibia's got slight varum to it, and most shin splints is the distal 1/3. And so the thought was with a wider base of gait, that concavity is kind of exaggerated, or I should say with a narrow base of gait, it sort of exaggerates the concavity. But if they ran with a little bit wider base of gait, they reduce some of that varus moment on the tibia. And I tried it. It's weird, because when you try to widen your gait, you sort of feel like you're running like this. And even if you only widen it, like I think the example they used in the study, or maybe I came up with it when I was goofing around myself on a track. Like I think the lines on a track are about 4 inches wide. So I would just try to run with my feet on either side of it. Even that felt too wide, but even like 2 inches a little bit wider decreases some of that bending moment on the tibia. So I wouldn't tell someone with shin splints that, this is the solution to your problem, but I might look at them on the gait, on the treadmill, and see if they have a crossover gait, because some people do have a crossover gait, and you just say, hey, just widen that 2 inches, that might make a difference. But that's some gait manipulation you can do. But I always tell patients, if you're going to change your gait, you're going to feel like you're working harder and running slower, and it's because you're shifting your body out of a metabolically efficient movement pattern to one that's less efficient, but it might alter the load enough to help reduce pain and keep you running, at least temporarily.
Fascinating. I just evaluated someone's biomechanics, and they were so valgum, their knees were knocking into each other, and I go, man, and I didn't even think to tell them to widen their gait. It was quite the dilemma.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes I battle that too. It's like, should I tell them to change their gait, or should I have them work on something that's going to take longer to change, right? Yeah. But sometimes I'll tell them, hey, here's a short-term intervention that might help you get your miles in while we're working on this part of therapy. So you can kind of look at it that way too.
Quick question on I've lately in the NFL, and there's been some Achilles tendon tears. We just had a police officer rupture the Achilles tendon right off the bone and had to get it, reattached. This poor guy. I wish I was involved in the rehab, but the orthopedic, wanted him to. It was a work comp injury, so you can imagine.
Yeah.
Man, he was in a boot for like it seemed like months.
He did have
I'm
it surgically
thinking,
repaired though? Was it surgically repaired or?
yes,
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
yeah. Would you have suggested at least some toe exercises? I mean, he had nothing.
Yeah. Nothing. Yeah. I mean, some of that stuff, yeah, it's easy enough to do just to move the toes without loading the Achilles, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's definitely a kind of a long recovery. As you guys know, that's a big tendon, and sometimes too
Yeah.
repairing it is like not that I've done surgical repairs of the Achilles, but the surgeons talk about it's like kind of sew a mop, the ends of a mop together sometimes, and trying to find ways to augment the repair. So I guess it depends on how he did it, but I don't know that there's one, like for a lot of stuff, as you guys know, there isn't one agreed upon rehab program, but yeah, sometimes keeping the small things strong and active while you're working on the ability to start loading the big repaired structure can help with the progress.
Not sure. In the same stride in that conversation, there have been quite a few Achilles tendon tears because of, they think it's because of the turf that they're instead of real grass in the NFL. Have you heard anything about
I
that?
haven't, and I haven't seen I know there's a few different papers on it, and in fact, I actually had downloaded a couple, and I haven't even read them yet. I've got a couple on my computer, but yeah, I know it's controversial, but it does. I thought I saw something that showed there wasn't a significantly higher rate of rupture on turf than grass, but then I saw another paper that was, so I think it might be a little bit mixed in the literature.
We'll give you 5 minutes. Can you go read those papers and come back and give us your opinion? But
I know. Maybe that'll be another topic down the line, but
Maybe,
yeah,
yeah,
but certainly with
yeah.
this last season, it was in the
totally.
forefront,
But why
wasn't it?
why do you
So
think it is? Because
Yeah.
turf's been around for a while, and so why do you see
yeah,
this all of a sudden this increase in ruptures? I mean, is it the shoes? Is it lack of foot strength? Is it lack of anterior tibials? What's your opinion?
yeah, I could only speculate. I don't think I could pinpoint it because even though, like you said, the turf's been around for a while, and the shoes haven't really changed that much in that time either, Terry. So yeah, so I really couldn't speculate. I don't
What's
know.
your
I don't think
guess?
anyone knows yet. I honestly, I don't even have a guess. I couldn't tell you. Could it be? I think it'd be a reach to say, oh, maybe their foot intrinsic strength needs to be better and they wouldn't rupture.
Hmm.
So yeah, I couldn't tell you. I mean, you could certainly say that, the size of these guys and the speed they play at. I mean, the performance
Yeah.
levels are higher and higher. Is that it? Have we reached the maximum capacity of the Achilles tendon when the huge guys are playing at that kind of
Hmm.
speed? I don't know.
Actually, Paul, I have a question that I've been wanting to ask someone for the longest time. And that is, have you seen cleats lately? Like, I mean, especially standard issue cleats that the NFL or soccer provide. I mean,
Yeah,
they don't seem very biomechanically sound.
yeah.
I hear so many comments and complaints about
Hmm.
standard issue cleats that maybe come from Nike or
Yeah.
Adidas. Any thoughts, or
No, I'm
have
with
you
you,
heard this?
Spencer. I'm like, I'll even see some of the athletes that we treat have just a nightmare of a time trying to find shoes that fit them well, right? Especially the cleats. And it's, some of the guys are wearing like cleats that are 3 sizes too long because they don't have anything that's wide enough, right? And it's shocking. Even
Yeah,
these high level athletes don't have access to cleated footwear that actually is shaped like their foot. I mean, that's one of the things that like I like about the minimalist shoes is they're kind of shaped like our feet a little bit more, right? But you
yeah,
guys see, even especially the position players, their cleats are super narrow, super pointy in the toe. And I guess if you think about sports performance, and hopefully there'll be some good research that can highlight this in the near future. But I mean, I can't imagine that squeezing your toes together and trying to perform well is better for you than letting your feet spread out in a natural shape and be able to utilize your toes better, right? So I think there's a startup company in somewhere in the Pacific Northwest that's developing custom soccer cleats that are made from the scan of your
ooh,
foot. So then the cleats are shaped like your
Oh,
foot. I believe they're trying to come to market kind of as we speak. But I mean, that concept to me is really overdue and necessary for these athletes. And it is shocking that Nike and Adidas and others aren't really kind of saying, okay, at this point we need to make sure that we fit the foot well, because there's evidence even just on comfort of footwear that if you have comfort options and you select the most comfortable shoe, you're less likely to get injured, you fatigue less quickly, your sports performance improves. There's even evidence that your prefrontal cortex brainwave activity is smoother in shoes that are comfortable. And the most important part of comfort is fit. It's the first and most important thing. So yeah, I think that's definitely, Spencer. It's shocking. You see these athletes that look like they could afford a custom shoe that fits them well, and it's not available to them at the moment.
Well, you would have fallen over if you would have seen how some of these guys, they get these brand new shoes that, because Nike's is the sponsor, let's say, and you'll see the brand new shoe has a little X cut into where the bunion is, where the metatarsal, where the bunion would be, because their foot is so squashed in there.
That's the one thing too about, all these, colleges and teams, have their footwear contracts. And so, saying that every athlete on the soccer team has to be a Nike, or every athlete on the track and field team has to be a Nike, it's like, okay, that's really not the way to stay healthy and to optimize performance, but that's the way it is in this world.
You would think that would be the most 100%. Important piece of equipment. Gary. With that said, the dilemma that I've always tended to experience, and a lot of my patients do, is choosing the right footwear. Could you share some thoughts on how you would approach, or you tell a patient to select their footwear?
So most of the research on prescribing footwear has been done on running shoes, because there's such a high incidence of overuse injury in runners. And basically the research shows that the traditional method that's done in a shoe store, and full disclosure, I actually have an ownership interest in a running shoe store in Minneapolis. And so I help educate the staff. But if you go into most shoe stores in the U.S., they're going to look at your foot, maybe even watch you walk and say, oh, your arch does this, therefore we're going to put you in this shoe. Or you overpronate, therefore you need this shoe. There's been at least 8 or 10 different studies that tried to validate that method to show that it does reduce pain or injury in runners, and none of them showed that it works. So we know that method of fitting shoes is not scientifically valid. But if you look at the research on, okay, what is a valid method for reducing pain or injuries in runners, all the research shows that it comes down to the person trying shoes on, running in the shoes, because comfort decreases from standing to walking to running. So you do have to run in the shoe or perform the sports movement in that shoe that you're going to be using it for, to assess comfort. And then if you select the most comfortable option, and you have to try on at least 3 or 4 at minimum, then that would reduce your risk of injury and increase sports performance. So that's why I tell patients, do not buy your shoes online, and make sure you go to a store where you can try them on. Don't let anyone tell you what shoe to get. I'm not going to tell them what to get. Their therapist shouldn't tell them what to get. Their coach, their athletic trainer should not tell them what to get, because all the research shows we have to be our own expert at what's comfortable to us. And we all prioritize things differently. Like, some people like a really cushy running shoe. Some people like a shoe with more road feel. And here's a really cool study that I cite very often, done by Ben O'Nig and colleagues up at the University of Calgary. They took a group of runners, small group, it was only like 5 or 10 people in the study, but they had them come to the lab, and they fit them for 5 different shoes each. And then they sent those subjects away for a week. They said, go spend a week running in these shoes, getting familiar with them, and then come back for some testing. When they came back into the lab, they had them rate the shoes from most comfortable to least comfortable. So each subject had 5 shoes to rate. And then they put them on a treadmill, and they tested their VO2 max in each of the shoes. And they found that the shoes that they were most comfortable in were the shoes that they were most metabolically efficient in. And on the flip side, the shoes that were least comfortable, they were least efficient in. So that study is pretty cool that shows
cool.
part of the way we perceive comfort has to do with whether that shoe works with our body's preferred movement pattern or against it. And that was Mig's theory, the preferred movement pattern, that we can't necessarily measure or quantify how the shoe is going to affect our movement. But if you use comfort as sort of a proxy, that tells you the one that's working the best and one you're most efficient in, you're going to perceive.
That's cool.
So that's why I tell my patients, just trust your instinct. That study right there, we're not testing VO2 max in the running shoe store, so you just got to go by comfort.
One of the running shoe stores that I always send my patients to has a treadmill in there, which I think is super cool. And they actually have our local podiatrist go in and educate the salespeople, and it's fascinating because it used to be you go to Sports Authority and or Dick's and you pick out your favorite color.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, and you have to run in the shoe to get a sense of it. Like cause I'll go to the store and fit people, my patients will come in and meet me, or I'll just be there myself. But when some people just stand up in the shoe like, I like it. I'm like, no, you got to run in that shoe. I don't know if you like
and
it.
I'm so glad you mentioned to go to a store and run, because I have a friend of mine who owns a running store, and he's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to shoes, and his business is going under because everybody's going to Amazon and buying shoes. And then they want to bring the shoes back to him because they don't work. And he's like, well, you didn't buy them here. And they go, hey, will you honor? And his business is going under because everybody's doing, especially since the shutdown, everybody went online, and trying to get those patients back in the store is killing them. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you're so right. You've got to walk, move, do that. And so thank you for that, for all those shoe owners out there, or shoe stores owners out there.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like, if you treat foot and ankle, you have to have good relationships with retailers in your area, because you need them to take care of your patients, and you need them to be kind of intellectually honest when they're fitting shoes too, right? So I pretty much on a daily basis, that's one of my first questions, especially when I'm treating an injured runner, is where did you get your shoe, and did you compare it to a few others before you got it, or did someone tell you to get it? And I think right now, like 20% of all shoes are bought online. And if you're going for fashion, that's fine. But if you're going for performance or trying to reduce your risk of injury, it's not fine. It's not going to serve you in the end. And obviously, we're seeing people that are already injured. That's why they came into our clinics. So to them especially, I'm like, you got to go try it on. You got to get a place that you can do that.
You hear about the barefoot runners from Ethiopia that are breaking records in our, marathons here in the United States, and they're just, they're bred to be barefoot runners. How did the shoe evolve into such? Well, now it's a fashion statement, but how it's evolved and keeps evolving like it does. For performance.
Well, it was like in the 70s is when they started getting more cushioned, and then they just kind of kept getting thicker and thicker as the cushioning, became more and more prominent. And then I think to a point where, injury rates, when you look at, running before the whole cushioning phenomenon hit, running injury rates didn't really go down. They just changed. Like, I had read some stuff that showed during the first running boom in the early 70s, the most common running injury was Achilles tendon and calf strains. But then as shoes got more cushioned, then knee pain, patellofemoral pain became the most common injury. And the thought was that the higher cushioning changes shock loading rates, but it also encourages a longer stride, which increases the load on the knee. And then that, if you land with 2.5 times your body weight on an elevated platform of foam, there's more torsional forces. The shoes can compress unevenly. And so the injury rates didn't go down, but they just changed to different places. And it's a good friend of mine, Craig Payne, is an Australian podiatrist, and he's brilliant, but he always says different shoes load different tissues differently for different runners. And his point is that there's always stress and load with running, and whether you're talking minimalist or maximalist or old shoes versus new shoes, there's a stress and load with running. The shoes influence it differently for different people in different ways. So So you can't get away from the injury rate in runners. And part of that is that running is highly repetitious. We run in straight lines on flat surfaces, relatively constant paces. So there's a lack of variability in that movement pattern. And so that's one of the thoughts why overuse injuries are so high in runners. And so one thing that I tell my patients is you want to introduce variability by either changing up the terrain, so getting off road, going to the beach, having trail run versus asphalt and concrete. But there was a paper that showed that having more than one pair of running shoes reduces your risk of injury, and that again would be because you're introducing variability. And I usually tell my patients, make sure those shoes are as different from each other as you find comfortable. Because I am seeing, and maybe you guys are seeing this in clinic too, like some people that only run in shoes with big rockers like Hoka's or the Maximals type of shoes. I'm starting to see people getting like tibialis anterior tendonitis. I never used to see that in runners, but now you see it. And I always ask them, is this your only running shoe? And very often they're like, yep. Or they're like, no, I have another pair of Hoka's too. It's like, okay, well, if you have a conventional shoe, good, or you like your Hoka's, I'm not telling you not to run in it, but you need to find another shoe to rotate into the mix. And just like with the other stuff, there isn't like a hard and fast rule, like one shoe should be for your long runs, one shoe should be for your speed workouts. Some people like it that way, but others are like, yep, I got a trail shoe, I got a minimalist shoe, I got a Hoka shoe, I got whatever. So, but having at least two to introduce that variability is a way and a strategy to reduce your risk of injury.
Absolutely fascinating. I love it. And you cite references. That is great. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. Now, I have another age-old question that I've been so curious about for so long, is the routine ankle bracing and taping that you typically see in football and basketball. Now, understand that, and for the listening audience, I love athletic trainers. I mean, we get along always so well, and yet what I see is the constant need to tape an ankle, even in the absence of injury. Your thoughts on what that does to the biomechanics of the foot?
Yeah, well, and I'd say I haven't like dove into literature on that recently, but yeah, you do. Anytime you restrict motion in one joint, the joints nearest it then have an altered stress and load too, right? So what is the right amount to safely, limit motion of the ankle joint without increasing the stress and load on the knee or the joints of the foot and ankle? But I certainly see a lot of that too. Although I guess in my area, I don't think I see it overused. We work with some of the local universities and colleges, some of the professional teams, and I would say that I don't necessarily see a lot of like what we'd call prophylactic taping, where people are taping just to prevent an injury. But I did have recently a high-level volleyball player. Her mother was a college volleyball player in the 90s, and she came in with foot pain. And as we were kind of talking about things, I think it might have taken even the second visit before I understood that she always plays in ankle braces. And once she told me that, I was like, okay, well, so because you have ankle sprains? She was like, no, my mom had ankle sprains when she played college volleyball, so she always had to wear ankle braces. So now I wear ankle braces. And so I had to talk to the mom, and she was kind of reluctant at first, but I said, hey, look, the research has changed that prophylactic taping or bracing, if your daughter doesn't have an ankle injury or history of ankle injuries, we wouldn't want to brace her, we'd want to strengthen her. And the problem was she was getting pain to her talonavicular joint, which is, as you guys know, not a common area to get beat up, but that's kind of right where the brace was causing her to probably overload that part of her foot. So I was like, we got to get her out of the brace because of her foot pain. And the good news is that she doesn't need to be in a brace because she doesn't have history of ankle injuries anyway. And like I said, the mom was reluctant, and they actually became really good patients because they have other athletic kids. So I see them regularly, but the mom, having played college sports in the 90s, was like, okay, that's just what we did. And it's like, I know that is what you did, and it was done more commonly then. Right? Is that what you guys see too?
Yeah. I'm still seeing high school and colleges tape prophylactically and spat and doing all this stuff. It seems like it hasn't caught up yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you know, it can be different school to school or region to region too, right? Some of the philosophies of the athletic training team and the medical team kind of vary.
it's such an integral part of preparation before a game or practice that I wonder if some of the athletic trainers would think that their utility would decrease if they stopped doing taping or talk. Like, what
Yeah.
else would they do? I'm sure there's other things, but I mean, it's so pervasive. I mean,
Yeah.
it's every, and actually a few really sharp NFL guys would say, no, I don't want any taping. I've never had an ankle sprain, or I
Yeah.
had an ankle sprain, but I really want to depend on my own biomechanic. And I'm impressed that they go against the grain of what the majority.
I got a quick question, because I read somewhere down the road that especially with like a Zonus tape, it only really is good for about 20 minutes. Is that true?
Mhm.
Because maybe part of the taping, they get taped an hour before the actual game, and by the time they actually start the game, the tape isn't really doing anything anyway, and maybe it's more of a mental thing.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I saw that too, Terry. I think I saw something said after about 20 minutes, the tape has kind of stretched a little bit and loosened. And I guess maybe I remember the paper. It didn't mean that it wasn't doing anything anymore, but it wasn't giving as much support as when it was first applied, of course. So yeah, I don't know, but there was another paper I downloaded but didn't read yet that even just showed foot intrinsic strengthening is a great part of rehab after an ankle sprain. So you would also think that, because obviously with sprains we're always talking about preventing the reoccurrence, right? So maybe that's an area. It's like, maybe again coming back a little bit to where we started, instead of taping a lot, should we just be making sure that they're really strong and activated in those intrinsic muscles of their foot, in addition to the same strength, balance, proprioception training that they're doing post ankle sprain anyway?
So, Paul, we are entering the phase of one of my favorite parts of our show, and that is the rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
Some of it has nothing to do with what we talked about, and some of the questions have something to do with what we talk about, but it's more personal. And there's 5 questions.
Okay.
And as I said, they're rapid fire. Are you prepared?
All right, bring them on.
All right, man. Ready. Question number 1. Where's your favorite place to go barefoot? Beach, forest, desert, or park, or somewhere else?
Ooh, yeah, I guess I'd have to say beach. Yeah, it's safer, and the sound of the ocean is just something therapeutic.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
Great. Question number 2. Favorite foot health tip that you like to share, or you feel is unique?
I would say kick off your shoes. Just kick them off. Go barefoot. Let your feet spread out. It's so good.
Yeah. Question number 3 is, I've seen YouTube. We've all seen these videos of people that have no arms that can do such things that are with such dexterity with their feet. Is there something that you would suggest